Brightly beams our Father's mercy from His lighthouse evermore. But to us He gives the keeping of the lights along the shore. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save.
Jesus tells us to let our light shine before men in Matthew 5 and verse 16. And one of the ways we do that is by our example and what we do. And so that we can let the lower lights be burning. It's been entrusted to us as Christians. Are you a Christian? I hope so. And if not, do you want to know more about it? Let us know. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24, this is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, but exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. We're engaged in a series of studies right now about doing right. I hope you're interested in doing right. I wouldn't think you'd be listening to a discussion like this unless you were. But the thing is, even for those of us who are interested in doing right, sometimes we can delude ourselves into thinking there is a excuse for doing wrong at times, or excuse ourselves from doing the right thing. So last time we talked about doing right, whether anyone sees us or not. And today we want to talk about doing right regardless of what everybody else is doing, regardless of what everybody else is saying, regardless of what the public opinion is about a particular thing. And that all goes back to, what does God say about it? You know, if God says a thing is right, it's right. If God says a thing is wrong, it's wrong all the time. It doesn't matter what excuses or you know, what we would call circumstances that that prevail, that would nullify the norm. None of that matters. If God says it's wrong, it's always wrong. If God says it's right, it's always right. If I, as a parent, if I'm warning my kids, don't do that just because everyone's doing it, and that's my only motivation, well, that falls way short. But I do need to be warning them that just because everyone's doing it doesn't make it right. What does God say about it? A lot of times we may be willing to admit that the thing is wrong, at least in principle, but we all of a sudden rationalize it because there are so many people who are involved in it. It has become so prevalent that we think it is now insignificant. Our language would be such a thing. When I was growing up, even very minor slang terms were not allowed in my house. The things that I hear people saying today, Christians saying today, were not allowed in my house. And I'm not saying that those things are necessarily right or wrong. I'm saying that my parents certainly erred on the side of caution. They didn't want to get anywhere close to slang language that could be misconstrued as taking the Lord's name in vain or saying things that were disrespectful or profane. And those things now I hear regularly. Watching things on TV or videos or going to the movies. When I was young, there were things that, were just bordering on shady, and people would avoid those because they just got too close. Now, Christians are making excuses. Well, I hear that kind of language everywhere. It doesn't affect me. I see that kind of thing all the time. It doesn't affect me. Well, the fact is, it does affect us, whether we want to admit it or not. And I've even done some experiments with, especially with my teenage classes through the years, to show that even when we don't know things are affecting us, they do. And if you're interested in some of those experiments, I'll be glad to share that with you. But, we can't think that things are just trivial because so many people are involved in it. I can remember when I was working in various jobs in the past, punching a clock. And I've had people that would call me and say, hey, I'm going to be a few minutes late to work. Can you punch my time clock card for me? Now, a lot of people were doing that. Does that make it right? What that time card clock says is, I was here, present, and working at 8 a.m. And what reality is, I didn't get there till 8:10 or 8:15. And my employer paid me for that time that I slept in or got caught in traffic or whatever. That's stealing. Now, we might like to think, well, that's not really like walking in a holdup with a gun, but it's stealing. If you were the employer, you would certainly consider that stealing. And yet we rationalize things like that. I've heard people talk about taking towels from motel rooms, or I used to be around a lot of people that were in the trucking business, and heard some people that were involved in trucking say, well, there's no way for me to do this legally and make a living. I have to fudge a little bit on my logs or whatever, to be able to make a living. And so they excuse behavior that they readily admit is wrong. And they say, all the truck drivers know that. And I'm not trying to talk bad about truck drivers. In fact, that has become less and less of a thing now with what the government is requiring in electronic logs, and it's much more difficult to do that. But it's not just there. It's everywhere. People copy books illegally. They copy copyrighted music illegally, copy computer software. And a lot of times the excuse that we make is, well, so many people are doing it. It's become accepted. It's just a trivial thing. I want to remind you of a few Bible principles that should help us to guard our hearts in doing right, because it's the right thing to do, regardless of how many other people are involved in trying to gild the lily, trying to do the wrong thing. So let's think about how doing the right thing is always right, regardless of how many people are doing it a different way. Go with me over to Luke chapter 16 and verse 10, where Jesus says, "He who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. And he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much." Now, that becomes a very prevalent and important teaching for us. And the reason that is because it affects so many areas of our life. Now, that teaching, that saying by Jesus is right on the heels of his parable of the unjust steward. And I would say that's a difficult parable. There are things in there that take me a long time to work out. But there's an overall easy message there, that we're supposed to do the right thing. And part of the summation and the climax of that parable is if you try to fudge on the little things, what you consider little things, then all that shows is a heart that's willing to do what's wrong at times, and you'll do it in the big things too. So there are no, trivial things that we should think it's okay just because public opinion says it's all right. A couple other passages I want you to think about with me. Over in Exodus chapter 23, where God is speaking through Moses and telling Moses to teach the people this law, what's just. And he says in Exodus 23, "You shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice." Now, there's two words there in verse 2 I want you to think about. You shall not follow a crowd. A crowd is not one or two, is it? A crowd is a lot. And here a lot of people are doing evil, but God says don't follow them. He says don't testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. There are many that are doing it, but God says you don't do it. It doesn't matter how many people are doing it. You don't do it. So the majority public opinion didn't make a thing right, and it doesn't make a thing right now. You remember Jesus teaching about this on the paths of life. Matthew 7 and verse 13, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it." Now, there's a lot of people going in the wide gate, the broad way. There's a lot of people, but it leads to destruction. Do you want to end up in destruction? Do you want to be destroyed? Many people are going that way. Doesn't make it right, does it? Doesn't make it a destination that we want. Now, one other passage I want to remind you of before we end this particular segment. It comes from Numbers chapters 13 and 14, where you might remember that spies were sent into the promised land. And these spies returned. They wanted a report before they went in to take the promised land. And so 12 spies were sent out. Okay, remember that number. 12 spies, one from each of the tribes of Israel, sent out to spy out the land. And as they return, it says in Numbers 13 and verse 25, they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. They departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. Now, twice in verse 26, it says all the congregation, and then it also says all of them. So, we're talking about the majority. We're talking about everyone here. And so these spies showed them the fruit of the land that was just incredible. They brought back, but they also tell them about the fact that they saw giants there. They saw fortified cities. And what they said in verse 31 is, "We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we." And the result, as chapter 14 starts, is all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And verse 2, "And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness.'" And then if you'll notice in verse 4, "So they," that is all the congregation, "said to one another, 'Let us select a leader and return to Egypt.'" All the congregation, that is the majority. But now in verse 6, Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke, 2 people out of an entire congregation that may have been millions. They spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, "The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us a land which flows with milk and honey. They didn't go the way that the majority went. They didn't even go the way that the majority of the spies went. They are 2/12. They are 1/6 of the spies that were sent out. They are a small minority, but they went the right way. You see, it's never right to go the way of the majority. It may be the easy way, but it's never right to go that way if that way is wrong. Right's always right. Wrong's always wrong. It doesn't matter how many people are on which side. It's just right and wrong. Hope these things will help us throughout the day today. There'll be some decisions that come up. Maybe a lot of folks will say, hey, everybody does it. But maybe we can now stop and say, what does the Lord say about it? I don't care how many people do it. All I want to know is, what does the Lord say about it? Hey, thanks for thinking about these things. I hope that they'll be of some value to you. If you want to talk more about them, if you agree or disagree, or you have things you want to discuss more, or thoughts about topics for the future, leave a comment, whether it's here on Facebook or YouTube. Use Messenger or use the comment section on YouTube. Send an email to me or to the church, and we'll be glad to talk to you at length about those things and any other things, spiritual things that you would like to talk about. We would like to make ourselves available to you. Hey, until next time, if the Lord allows us to live and he gives us another opportunity, I hope that you all have a great day and you do the right thing, no matter how many people are doing the wrong thing.
Trim your feeble lamp, my brother. Some poor sailor tempest tossed, trying now to make the harbor, in the darkness may be lost. Let the lower lights be burning, send a gleam across the way. Some poor fainting, struggling seaman, you may rescue, you may save.